Although his image no longer graces the $100 note, Sir Douglas Mawson remains one of Australia's most famous explorers. The geologist is best known for his work in the Antarctic, where during one of his trips he survived brutal conditions that claimed the lives of two of his companions. While much has been written about the physical endurance of Mawson and his team, a new publication has shed light on the emotional survival techniques employed by the group. Mike Sexton reports.
These days at Commonwealth Bay on the edge of the Australian Antarctic Territory, the Adelie penguins are the custodians of Mawson's hut. But almost a century ago, this modest wooden building was home for the 18 members of the Australasian Antarctic expedition led by geologist Douglas Mawson.
It must have been really hard. They were facing really tough climatic conditions. It wasn't pleasant, and of course, particularly during the winter, they would have been inside that hut. They weren't going outside for any reason whatsoever, so everything they had to do would have been inside that hut.
This part of the world is home to some of the most ferocious winds on Earth, and during a sledging trip to conduct scientific experiments, Mawson lost companions Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Nunes, and then almost died himself. By the time Mawson staggered back to the hut, most of the expedition group had returned by ship to Australia. 6 men remained behind to wait for any sign of their colleagues. It would be 12 months before the ship returned.
There were tensions, and I think there was probably a bit of resentment as well that they had to spend another year there. And Mertz and Nunes were 2 very popular members of the expedition, and when it was only Mawson who returned, I think it was pretty disappointing.
Emma McEwen is Sir Douglas Mawson's great-granddaughter and has researched and written about her famous ancestor. She believes after surviving the brutal conditions, Mawson faced a mental battle to keep morale up among the small group cooped up in the hut together. To add to the tension, he had a fresh wireless operator to deal with.
The man operating that, Sidney Jeffries, was a newcomer to the expedition. He hadn't been there in the first year and had come down on the ship with Davis. And he was a very good wireless operator, but he became seriously mentally ill and was quite violent, and it was very difficult.
To keep the other men busy, Mawson began an in-house newspaper called the Adelie Blizzard and insisted that each man contribute. They wrote poems and articles that were combined with births and death notices, weather reports, and even international news received via the wireless.
It was also a way of sharing their common experiences, so it brought them together when there was probably a bit of dissension in the hut, and provided a bit of entertainment. They only made one issue, which was then sort of passed around to each member of the hut to read.
When the ship finally arrived to collect them in December 1913, the 7 men left their tiny home, taking their scientific data and some equipment with them. The gear is now part of the South Australian Museum's polar collection, and among the artefacts are the well-worn pages of the Adelie Blizzard.
Mawson and Archie McLean, who was the editor of the newspaper in 1913, both tried to publish it on their return to Australia.
They were unsuccessful, but now, almost 100 years later, the Friends of the State Library of South Australia has published the papers.
You could almost say that it lay not quite forgotten, but perhaps not appreciated.
Retired librarian Val May Hankel is president of the Friends Group and proudly boasts it's the oldest such library organisation in the country.
The Friends were established back in 1932 during the Depression, when the library had virtually nothing to buy books with, and as finances gradually improved, the Friends started to buy rare and special and beautiful books and manuscripts and other items that the library couldn't otherwise afford.
The group raises money by publishing out-of-print books and has specialised in the works of inland explorers such as Ernest Giles and John McDouall Stewart. Despite the vastly different landscapes and climates they faced, Val May Hankel believes these explorers had much in common with Mawson.
Tensions and psychiatric problems that such situations evolve.
Next year will mark the centenary of the Antarctic expedition, and a group of volunteers are gently restoring Mawson's hut. Thanks to another group of volunteers in Adelaide, anyone can now visit the hut through the pages written by the men who lived there and the man who led them.
He had a very ferocious reputation, but actually I think he was an extremely thoughtful, philosophical person, and the sense that you get is that he really cared about the men on his expedition.
Mike Sexton with that report.